Hi gang, the joy of football today is full of football stories.
We've got comparisons, and Neil has picked some really good ones.
Declan Rice and Patrick Viera, Rodri and Roy Keane, Kylian Mbappé and Thierry Henry. Martin's letter from the Gantry is about headers.
Are the crosses not coming in from the best wide position for headers because of the preference for inverted wingers? We've all seen some splendid goalkeeping this season. Could that be an explanation? And the voice of passion comes from him. I try and put a bit of perspective to it, as you would expect me to do.
Press conferences. I hate them. I think they're badly organised. I think they're badly run.
How do you spell cynical?
Yeah, the same way as you spell experience. It's
Touche, Mr. Barnett.
There used to be giants. Sheffield Wednesday. Sheffield Wednesday were champions in 1903, 1904, 1929 and 1930s. You know, this once great striding giant of football has just disappeared and got rusty.
And we're picking one game from each of decades, and we go back decades. So stick with us, because I think you'll find some interesting stuff in there. The Champions League, Milan, Liverpool.
I'm going for a Champions League final, my first one. Manchester United, Chelsea.
Aguero, of course, that game.
Well, I'm obviously going for Chelsea winning the Champions League. But again, not because it's my club, just
not because I was sitting behind you in the ground.
Yeah.
Argentina, France, it's like a dream thinking about it.
So the joy of football staggers on.
Is sprinting.
The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks for Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, and it's the Joy of Football podcast again with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett. And just before we get going, a reminder that the competition to win an Aguero shirt from 2012 with Martin Tyler's signature on it, Aguero, thanks. It's been given to us by Classic Shirts.
Yes, after I was on Away Days, the program that Ellis does on YouTube, he made it very easy to talk about shirts and memories. And I know a lot of you have enjoyed Ellis's contribution to the show. It was just a real pleasure to be on it. It took me by surprise. I didn't realise how interesting it would all be going around these shirts. I got my Woking shirt as well, so I did sing for my supper.
Which year is that?
That's probably the mid-1990s, I think. Yeah, the club badge has changed since then. But it's my size, which is quite good, really.
It wasn't your promotion year.
This isn't quite my size. No, it wasn't. I've got the promotion ones at home.
I don't think it's Sergio Aguero's size anymore either. Anyway, If you want to enter the competition, it's not too late, depending on when you're listening to this. But as this podcast goes out, it's definitely not too late. And you can just go down to the description and find out how to enter. Sergio Aguero, signed by Martin Tyler. Aguero! Okay, we've got loads to get through today, and we're kind of going off on a bit of a limb this week, just to really indulge our joy of football. So we're going to start with a segment we left out last week because we had so much else to talk about. Comparisons. And we've got 4 comparisons this week.
Yeah, 3 football ones.
The first one is Declan Rice and Patrick Viera.
Yeah, I can. Neil dreams up these, and I think you're very good at getting people that we don't go, well, they're completely different. They're not, of course, completely different. I think probably, I'm not quite sure. Patrick did seem to score more goals at the start of his career. And maybe Declan, who often talks about getting goals and getting more goals, and of course he got one for England in the recent international in Finland. So perhaps that's one difference in the comparison, but it's not for the want of trying from Declan's point of view. And they're both key to, Patrick, of course, key to a successful side. I always think how appropriate it was. His last kick as an Arsenal player won the FA Cup in the penalty shootout in Cardiff. It was a sort of real way to sign out, a bit like Didier Drogba was supposed to in the Champions League final. Big fanfares from the commentator, and then, of course, he came back a couple of years later, so it wasn't his last kick as a Chelsea player. But no, I think there's a lot of similarities there. Both terrific people as well, and Patrick, I'm sure, will continue to be in our line of vision as a manager around the continent, maybe back in England again. And I'm sure in years to come, maybe long after you and I have left, that Declan will be a manager as well. He's got that kind of football brain.
I think that Patrick Viera was more intense. And I think that Declan Rice is slightly more controlled, and that's why Patrick Viera got sent off so many times, because it was that not more committed, but it was just that more intense desire to get the ball come what may. He was a bit of old school. The ball may pass me, the man may pass me.
I think I'm right in saying he got sent off in the first 2 games of the season, didn't he? I think away, maybe Sunderland, and a home game the next week. So, yeah, and we wondered whether he was going to stay in English football as a player. But I think he's mellowed. He's certainly a big competitor in his managerial work as well. But
you wouldn't imagine Declan Rice having the kind of violent relationship with an opponent that Patrick had with Roy Keane.
No, but there is no Roy Keane for Declan to. And the interpretation of the laws of the game, I don't want to set you off again here, but that has changed a little bit. You can't step out of line in Declan's time now. And Patrick obviously crossed the line a couple of times, but
and there are cameras in the tunnel.
Yes, there are cameras in the tunnel.
Declan Rice wouldn't get away with it.
It's a very important development in the history of well-behaved footballers or better-behaved footballers. There were no cameras in the tunnel at Wimbledon in the 1980s.
No, but you don't. The irony is that you never heard of Patrick Viera misdemeanours off the pitch. No. I'm not saying you do with Declan Rice. I'm saying they're very similar in that sense. All Patricks were on the pitch, and Declan doesn't seem to have any.
No, I mean he's a very well balanced individual. He's got a steely side because obviously when he was released by Chelsea. He went straight out and got himself another club, and I'm going to show you, and he has done.
And what he's done is he's retained the affection of all his clubs. I mean, Chelsea have talked a lot about buying him.
He's probably walking down the street. He lives just around the corner from here.
and but you know, he left West Ham. Well, talking about last game, he left West Ham lifting the trophy of the UEFA Conference, the third trophy of their history.
The difference also is he hasn't achieved at Arsenal what Patrick achieved, and he's still got time to do that. Arsenal look in very good shape, and he's a very important part of that.
What's his limit?
I don't think there's too many limits. I mean, he's not going to probably dribble past 6 players and stick it in the top corner, but he might. He'd have the desire to do that. I think he knows his game, and he plays not within it, but up to it. You know, I think he's always when you're commentating on a game that Declan's playing in, you're always aware that he could be clearing the ball off the line one moment and then knocking in the winner or an important goal at the other end. So he's got most of the tools of the job.
Second comparison: Rodri and Roy Keane.
You're really into midfield players, aren't you, this week? Well, I mean, Roy Keane is a complete one-off. He's a fascinating person. I was lucky enough to work with Roy in my time at Sky, and always interesting, always got something to say about a game, about life as well. You know, he's a thoughtful man, as well as at times a loud critic. And again, he's done it all. I mean, Rodri's done most of it, hasn't he? And Rodri, obviously, with so much ahead of him. But clearly, what has been a setback, we might have a different conversation if Rodri hadn't been injured a few weeks ago, and he's going to miss most of the season, it seems. Rodri arrived in English football, and actually, I think I've told this story before. His first time in front of the media was in the Asia Trophy in the Far East that City were playing in, and he astounded everybody with a very good command of English, and let us know how he'd done that, which was spending time in the United States at soccer camps when he was younger, obviously from a family that could back him for that. So he's slightly blotted his copybook with political statements that you're not really supposed to do. Passion, people are allowed their opinions. There are enough English people in the game having comments about political issues, so I don't think we can set him aside for that. But UEFA did, because it's against their regulations. If you didn't remember, it was at the end of the Euro 2024 final when he was yet again a winner. Although when he went off in the game, I think a lot of English fans were saying, well, that's going to turn it England's way, but it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, Rodri, like Roy Keane, was more of a box-to-box midfielder in his youth, and that's what City bought from Atletico Madrid. But obviously Pep knew he was going to turn him into that defensive midfielder.
He didn't play that long for Atletico Madrid, did he? It was a very short spell, and he came to England.
But his quality there was bombing up and down and knocking 25-yarders and top bins, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. You like that top bins, don't you?
Yeah,
and our last podcast.
But Roy Keane, of course, scored his fair share of goals in the first half.
He scored a lot of goals. I mean, again, it reminded me of Brian Robson, who was always not a curse for the commentators, but somebody you had to really keep an eye on, because suddenly the ball would be in the net and somebody would be wheeling away, and you think, where did he come from? In the late runs into the box, sort of followed by the likes of Frank Lampard and Stevie Gerrard, and that is a quality. I think Rodri can do the same. I mean, he's scored some very important goals, and he's not short in that respect, even though we understand that Pep still doesn't like shooting from distance for his players.
Do you think that Roy Keane, because of his fouling, because of his violent attempts at assassination of opposition, is
only Arsenal players, really? I think mostly Arsenal players,
and fathers of current Manchester City players.
Yes.
But do you think that he's slightly unremembered for his quality?
I think the shame about Roy, and he deserves proper recognition for his ability and his achievements, is that one or two things that happened, the Republic of Ireland thing, when basically he was sent home. So that's it's hard to live that down. All I can say is, having had the privilege of being in his company quite a lot, socially and professionally, he's always turned up, and he's not one to, I don't fancy this game. I've worked with some people going back over the years who basically would not allow it to be called Super Sunday because they didn't think the game was super. But Roy's a proper football man, and I'm very lucky, I think, to have got to know him as well as I have done.
Our final football comparison is Kylian Mbappé and Thierry Henry.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to say that they're completely different. They are in the same envelope. Left wingers who can play centre forward, although I think Thierry probably took it. I don't know that Kylian really loves playing through the middle. We hear him say that. He learnt his English having never played here. Thierry didn't have too much English when he came, and then suddenly became so fluent in it, as fluent as he was on the football pitch. And he did take a little slow start, didn't he, on the pitch when he first came.
But he lived with an English partner, didn't he, when he came? Once he settled.
You know these things now. I concentrate on the football.
Yeah,
stats.
but this is really important. That I think that the overseas players who come over here, the ones who learn their fluent English, are the ones who live with English partners.
I think living in the country is if I spent 3 weeks in France, I did French A-level. Are they still called A-levels now? Yeah. and it was mostly written, and I can read French pretty well, but there was no oral examination in my time, or if there was, it was right at the end. And I've often felt very very weak in going to France and trying to get my knowledge across. I remember being interviewed. I said, I'll do an interview. I did French. It was in a tournament in France. It was awful. I was embarrassed for everybody in the room. Not so much myself, but I'd put these people through the optimism that I could hold a conversation. But when I did the Paris end of the UEFA Euro 2016, I worked with a French crew. And then finally, in what would I be, nearly 70, finally I started to think in French.
Really?
And the annoying thing about it, and you'll understand this, maybe many of you watching, is the moment I wanted to speak French, they spoke English to me. Yeah. It was the perversity of the relationship between the two countries. So I never really got that back, but I definitely had it for like a week, and I loved it. So language, but some people get language and some people don't. You can tell in the commentators, some are more comfortable pronouncing foreign names. I was at an event recently, and a Turkish student asked a question, and I said, "What about the G with the little thing on the top then?" And he went, "Yeah, you don't say it." I said, "Well, tell everybody it is Gundogan, Artukolu, and the young boy at Brighton now who's got a G with a well, you don't say it." So language is quite complicated, and especially if people do speak English. But Killian, who I don't know whether he's learnt it for professional reasons or whether he's at a school where it was an important thing, but his interviews in English have been way beyond the Call of Duty, really. Yeah.
Very good. I think with Thierry Henry, I think it's worth saying that he had more centre-forward qualities than Kylian Mbappé has. And I know you're going to talk about headers in a moment, but people used to say, "Oh, he's not that great a header of the ball." I remember him scoring headed winners against teams like Manchester United in their pomp. He for me, although he wasn't the archetypal centre forward, he had everything as a centre forward.
Yeah, I mean, he's a Premier League legend, football legend. He's still carrying on in the game, which we love to see. The greats retaining their joy of football. Really, I'd love to have him here, and it's not impossible because he's the sort of guy who would pitch up for a chat, And he's obviously been around with Roberto Martinez. The France Olympic team got silver medal, I think, didn't they, in the summer? So he's a special person. We are talking about not just special talents. I think maybe everybody we've mentioned today is a special person as well as a very fine footballer. And maybe if they weren't such special people, they wouldn't be such good footballers. They have the character, the resilience. It's not intelligence like doing university degrees and things like that, not academic intelligence, but they have streetwise intelligence. Then they're great in company. Football's a team game, and having the ability to, sometimes the star players, it's difficult because they do get more acclaim. And I'm going to talk later on, we get another section about a guy who scored the winning goal in one of the most famous games in the 1950s, but somebody else scored 5 goals. And the guy who got the winning goal and never got nobody wanted to interview him afterwards because the guy who got 5 took all the plaudits. So sometimes the striker can be looked on from the rest of the dressing room as being an individual in a team game, but hang on a minute, did you win the game? Did he score the goals? So you have to accept that,
Mbappé, 4 goals in World Cup finals, plus a shootout penalty. The first teenager to score in a World Cup final since Pelé. He's been at PSG, now he's at Real Madrid. If every game that he played wasn't on television, like every game that Pelé played wasn't, and every game that Maradona played wasn't, Maradona, of course, got to 2 World Cup finals. Do you think Mbappé would be talked about in the same breath already as those two?
Well, I think he's, if you walk around here, we're just outside London in a very populated part of the county of Surrey, that you'd see people wearing a few local shirts, some of your club, not too far away from here. Probably Manchester City shirts that have taken over now, maybe the odd Newcastle shirt, because there's always a Geordie somewhere. But you'd see Mbappé shirts, especially now, the combination of the Real Madrid shirt and the name. I mean, I'm sure they're getting a return on their investment, a considerable investment, almost already, because commercially it's a sensation, and he lives up to that. If your top player is shy and retiring, you can't get him out to talk to people or open supermarkets or anything what the club wants to do. It's a problem. But when they're as engaging as Kylian is, and everybody we talk to, I'd go to a supermarket opening from Declan Rice, Patrick Viera, Rodri, Roy Keane, Kylian Mbappé and Thierry Henry, because they're good blokes, and they'll engage, not with something I happen to know them, but they'll engage with anybody who wants to talk to them, and that's special. I like that.
I think it'd be more fun to go to a supermarket closing with Roy Keane. Right, this is the final one, and this is the most important one.
I feel trapped, but there's a truth in it, so I'm going to be very honest with you.
Taylor Swift and Miranda Lambert.
Well, I've heard of Ricky Lambert and Mickey Lambert, who was sub for Ipswich in the 1978 FA Cup final, I remember. But Miranda I don't know, so I'm not very good in comparison. But what you want me to say, Neil, I will say. I was driving home one night and I switched on my car radio, and I saw that there was a channel which had TAYSVER, I think, not VAR. I thought, what the hell is this? So I thought, and it was the famous radio station had for the summer total Taylor Swift music. Now, of course, I'd heard of Taylor Swift, the connection with sport, of course, with her boyfriend in American football, the NFL. But I'd never really. I discovered I had heard one or two of the songs on various escapades in other radio stations. But the songs were brilliant. I loved them all. They were all like in my tunnel vision of music. I'm a real pop music person, The 60s, wow. But not the heavy stuff. Yeah, the songs are like 90 seconds, hits for like 11 weeks, and you never hear the singer again. But the music is great. So I'm an absolute child of that time. And I found something similar in this lady singing, who I learned, much to my surprise, was the world famous Taylor Swift. So all I can say is I haven't heard it, and that channel's now closed. It was just for the summer, and I was actually driving when they closed it down midnight on August the 31st. I was in the car, and it was
late bird.
And it just went goodbye, and I have not heard a Taylor Swift song since. Right. So am I deprived?
Have you got a record player, CD player, or do you just stream everything?
I don't stream any. I suppose if I listened on YouTube, I would. That's what I should do. But I've been so busy trying to keep you on a tight rein that I can't indulge. But I did hear that our Prime Minister did meet Taylor Swift, allegedly. So whether
there's photographs, unless it's artificial intelligence.
But I would like to have a conversation about comparisons with. But I don't know Miranda Lambert, so Lulu would be something like my time, But I honestly, I noticed that I've told a few of my family and my partner that I think the music is great, and they just look at me and say, "How old are you?" But I'm trying to grow very old ungracefully, and Taylor's helping.
Right. Well, Miranda Lambert is hardcore, whereas Taylor Swift is softcore, and she's a sort of country singer who is from a rough background, with the sweetest voice ever and a powerful voice, and makes songs about basically shooting men who are unfaithful to her because she's a Texan girl.
Well, there's a lot of what I gather, and I'm not very up on the lyrics, but I gather there's a storyline in many of Miss Swift's songs as well. So I don't know about murder being in it. I don't know about
I don't think she wants to murder so much as maim Miranda Lambert.
Right.
So yeah, but she is fantastic and hardcore and needs to be heard.
I'll leave you.
And she's got a wicked sense of humour. Wicked. So Miranda Lambert, not Taylor Swift. Right. We've got coming up.
He said that, not me.
We've got coming up Voice of Passion twice. They used to be giants. And our new segment, One Game. Like One Day. Did you see that film, One Day? Read the book? No?
No, you're far too intellectual for me, Neil.
Well, intellectual. Let's go to Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler.
Letter from the Gantry.
One or two long words and a very bad joke at the end. So will you concentrate on that bit, if you can stay to the end, that is. Right. OPTA's compiling of statistics and the subsequent interpretation of the facts and figures is unique in football. And there's not a commentator working today who's not been grateful for having access to their science and their skills. We have our differences, amicably debated, I can tell you, such as the use of the word touch in what some, including me, believe should be re-identified as involvements. A top dribbler like Everton's Iliman Ndiaye takes on opponents in the penalty area, making contact with the ball half a dozen times, let's say. Opta record that whole episode as one touch for the attacker. It would be much clearer if it was noted as one involvement. Why? I'm sure you're desperate to know the answer. Because when a striker brings the ball down in one movement and then with a second contact puts it into the net, it's categorised as a two-touch finish. Yet that moment will go down on the scorer's stats as one touch in the penalty area. Confusing. Easily solved with not using the word touch in two very different contexts. I also think if a player wins a penalty and it's successfully converted, the earner of the spot kick should get an assist. I do understand Opta's counter that there is a problem if the scorer is the same player as the one who's been fouled. A scorer getting an assist on his or her goal would take a bit of getting used to, but it is an accurate summing up of those situations. Anyway, after the first 7 rounds of the Premier League season, so not including last weekend, Opta, as usual, have come up with some intriguing stats from the top flight action up to that point. As a one-time non-league number 9, I've always been fascinated by data on headed goals. Even though top-level football seems much more possession-based, last season, when of course there was a record number of Premier League goals, 1,246, 203 were scored by headers. That's the most in the season since the famous 2011-12 campaign. You must recall Edin Dzeko, often forgotten though in discussions on this historic occasion, making it 2-2 on the final day with a fine header to pave the way for Sergio Aguero's game winner, title winner for Manchester City. But this season, in the first 70 games, there have only been 29 goals with headers. That's down from 0.53 per game to 0.41. Now, I've taken it one step further to the percentage of headers in total goals. Last season, in that record number of 1,246, 16% were headers. Now we have 29 out of 201 from those first 7 rounds of fixtures. That's down to 14%. You have to forgive me, I've just rounded up the figures to make it simple. Top notch in this category last season were Arsenal. 17 headed goals, those set pieces were already working. Relegated Luton, with great service from the likes of Andros Townsend and Alfie Doughty, managed 15 such goals, West Ham 14. At the bottom of the list, the other 2 relegated clubs, Burnley with 5 and Sheffield United 3, and in between Crystal Palace, who did finish 10th in the league table, managed just 4 headed goals. This season, again a reminder that this is prior to the latest round of games, Brighton and Aston Villa lead with 4 goals apiece. But 6 of the Elite 20 did not find the net with a header in their first 7 games. Crystal Palace, Fulham, Ipswich, Manchester City, Newcastle and Wolves. Fulham and City had 18 headed attempts without scoring, but Villa managed 4 goals from just 10 aerial efforts. It's a smallish sample and too early really for a trend, but it is worth an early investigation. Is the shortage of the traditional number 9s a reason? Are the crosses not coming in from the best wide position for headers because of the preference for inverted wingers? We've all seen some splendid goalkeeping this season. Could that be an explanation? Do not underestimate the influence of data. I was a guest at a London University's event last week alongside the excellent and eloquent Brighton CEO and Deputy Chairman Paul Barber. In the world of heavy spending and debt management, the Seagulls have actually made a profit in the last 2 seasons. In 22-23, a record 122.8 million. That's astonishing. Part of that comes from selling some of their best players, of course, and indeed a manager and backroom staff in the case of Graham Potter to Chelsea. The club's recruitment policy, based on a unique algorithm, saw Mark Cucurella, Leandro Trossard, Yves Bissouma and Alexis McAllister arrive on the south coast for relatively small fees but leave for much, much bigger money. The likes of Moises Caicedo and Robert Sanchez were similarly moved on in highly profitable deals done in the following tax year. Those increased values, of course, are boosted by performances on the pitch. In the football season alongside that record tax year, Brighton finished 6th and qualified for the Europa League. The students on business courses were fascinated, and rightly so. 20 years ago, algorithm could have been a description of Shearer on the dance floor. Think about it. Now it's the key to success. The Seagulls are still defying the odds, and with 4 of their first 13 Premier League goals, 30% from the aerial route, they yet again have made a head start.
Yes. I totally disagree. Algorithm would never describe
No,
Alan Shearer.
But he's called Al.
I can't. Has anyone seen Alan Shearer dance? No.
Yeah. 20 years ago he was, a bit different to what he is now. He was still banging them in then.
Yeah, and scoring goals with his head as well. Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny how it's gone out of fashion. Who would you actually say is the best attacking header of the ball around at the moment?
I do like Chris Wood, who's sort of come through. I mean, there's so many clubs, many of them in the Championship, and now. I
mean, from set plays, it's Gabriel.
Yeah, well, he's obviously not a traditional number 9, is he? He's a traditional Tony Adams number 6. So it is. I think it may well even itself out. There are variables in all these statistical things. There are those who, OPTA, who do a great job because there's so much detail required now. It has become. I mean, you've worked for American employers, and the data that's been
nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the OPTA. I've brought this up on the podcast before. I think the whole OPTA assist thing is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous.
It's really difficult though. And we're talking about one size fits all. If the ball flicks, if I play the ball to you and you score, and if it flicks off a player who's trying to intercept it, I don't get the assist.
No. But I mean, I spent 7 years watching Eden Hazard get the ball on the halfway line, beat 4 or 5 people and score a goal, and whoever gave him the ball on the halfway line got an assist from OPTA. I mean, it's just ludicrous. It has to be subjective, which is what I keep saying about refereeing.
And that's what you have done for years.
I did. Well, I invented it at Chelsea before OPTA existed, and the statistician at Chelsea still keeps it that way, so that you can get 2-3 assists on a goal, or you can get no assists on a goal. And ironically, for penalties, I gave an assist to the person who won it, unless it was the person who took it.
So you don't agree with me either, then.
So it was halfway in between.
But
it was halfway in between.
The one I was, poor Mario Balotelli, only Premier League assist is the famous Aguero goal. And he got brought down for penalties that he converted, and he's got the goal to show for it. But
I mean, it's in the same way. If you score a genius goal of solo brilliance, shouldn't you get the assist? And that because you've made it and scored it. I mean, I've spent the last year watching Cole Palmer do that, but I don't think it's particularly creatively considered statistic.
The algorithm that Brighton, of course, don't tell us the detail of, but they're prepared to admit that that's what, and I'm sure, I think Brentford have got the same sort of similar background of the owners. They were friends, weren't they? And they do it the same way. But the recruitment is, you can go so far, but what Paul did say, and he won't mind me repeating on this, that everybody at Brighton, every person who works for Brighton, they know if they leave who's going to be the next cab off the rank. So if you're, I don't know, chief steward or press officer or whatever part you have in the football club, of course people move on and they're ready. But that's a real gift, a real skill.
When people talk about algorithms with football and the way that clubs pursue them, I think they probably don't talk about how much scouts still go and watch players and make the final decision when they see them perform. I mean, the old George Graham thing, when he was manager of Arsenal for such a long, successful time, he insisted that any scout, before saying, I think we should buy this player, watched him away as well as at home.
That's very true.
So that you knew what his personality, his character was against
I think that's the hardest thing to define. One Premier League club employed somebody I know to follow the footsteps for a week or so to see what they did, whether in their native country, it was, and that, you could say that's maybe a bit excessive, but it certainly gave a lifestyle impression, and which was factored into the signing. They did sign the player.
And the other thing is, you hardly ever see, when you watch games on television, you hardly ever see a manager from another club watching, whereas in 20 years gone, 25 years gone, you see managers, groups of managers watching games.
No data then, so it was all to do with their eyes and what they saw. And you go back to people like Bob Paisley, who made such a contribution to Liverpool after Bill Shankly, and he had data in his head, and he also had a system in terms of injuries of just a card index. It was all written down. And obviously, the technology's made that a lot easier.
But you often saw Alex Ferguson at games. You often saw David Moyes more recently. You see him at
David
games.
was probably one of the ones who was doing it on a regular basis. So, but they trust the scouts. The scouts are all part of instead of being. They were part time. The big clubs had part time scouts who would perhaps be London taxi drivers, and ex non-league players, but who knew the game. And they had maybe have the chance to dart around to a game or an afternoon reserve game or something like that, where the staff is, and outside the top level, it's still done the way that you've just described, because there aren't enough people to go around.
Okay, letter from the Gantry, which of course you can read in Martin's letters from the Gantry on the Joy of Football Substack.com site, which you can also subscribe to, where you can see all his writings and indeed a load of mine.
Yeah.
Which aren't from here, but are
more about food than football, but they're very good.
Let's move on to the first voice of passion.
Voice of passion.
And this one is not my voice of passion, but listeners and watchers' voice of passion, who quite frankly were appalled at what I said about respecting the safe standing area, and I've been in a safe standing area and enjoyed it, but also wanting a safe desegregated area where you could actually be with opposition fans. This was the reaction. A lot of them haven't got names on them. I'll just run through some very quickly. I've been to a few women's games, and the bit I hated most was how lax they are about mixing. For me, football is meant to be tribal. For 90 minutes, I'm meant to hate you and wish you nothing but the worst. Another one, I swear to God, these people just want to sanitise top-level football until it's no longer recognisable as a truly competitive sport. Someone else says, then enjoy rugby. Somebody else says, it's called a pub. And then there's another one, can't think of anything worse, and yes, I do hate my rivals. Sorry. What year did he last go to a game? 50s, 60s? Is that the decades or my years? And there's a reply to that. in fairness, he does go to games, was with him in a pub in Malmo a few years back.
Was that male or female?
I've absolutely no idea. It's just a letter.
And if you did, you wouldn't say.
But what I will say is, I do remember being in pubs in Malmo.
Well, it can't have been too good if you remember it, Neil. So.
Malmo is in Sweden, and Chelsea were playing Malmo. But if you ever watched the brilliant series, and I don't watch much television, The Bridge, which was the bridge between Copenhagen in Denmark and Malmo in Sweden, and crimes around the two cities. Well, I was in both. We went across the bridge. And if you saw the last episode in which Sega, as they said over there, Sega, who for me is, talking of Taylor Swift and Miranda Lambert, one of the most attractive characters well, it's fiction, isn't it? Unfortunately, but at the end, she threw her ID card. She threw her ID card off the bridge into the river.
She's absolutely lovely, and I'm a big devotee of what they call Nordic noir, isn't it? I
wanted to stop and throw my journalist ID over the bridge into the river, but unfortunately in real life you can't stop on the bridge. So go to non-league football then. Been to hundreds of games at various grounds where everyone mixes. It's great, and so on. I won't go through any more, but it's been ridiculed. And what I would say to all you people is, you're morons, because I'm not saying the whole area's got to be desegregated. I'm not saying football isn't tribal. Of course it's tribal. There's no one more tribal than me. All I'm saying is, you don't have to hate in order to prove how much you love. And if you do, maybe there's something wrong with you.
Listen, I disagreed with you at the time, and I'm in sympathy for those. Not because you're an idealist, Neil, sometimes, and that is idealism. I don't think it I can't see the football fans of today really wanting it, but the lad or lady who said about non-league football was absolutely right. But at Woking in the National League, it's segregated now, and perhaps at times it's just as well it is. But there is far less hostility, but there's still plenty of passion for the teams.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't need to. It doesn't need to make passion less. You just don't need to fight everyone. Right. Now, can we go on to
Voice of Passion?
Voice of Passion.
With Voice of Reason. My passion this week is about press conferences. I hate them. I think they're badly organised. I think they're badly run. And the worst ones of all are the UEFA press conferences before and after Champions League games, or before Champions League games. The day before a Champions League game, well, all UEFA club competitions, the teams have to put up not just the manager, but a player as well. And it's painful. And the players, a lot of players get put up who only semi want to be there. And the clubs decide which player is being put up. And the journalists don't want them, don't know them, don't know anything about them.
I've been at some of those when the third goalkeeper in the squad has been the put-up player.
Yeah, and it's become a ritual. And in her last pre-match press conference before leaving women's football in England, Emma Hayes spoke out against the press conference before going to the USA.
What's the alternative?
And this is what she had to say.
You were talking about the strain and everything it's taken out
Yeah.
of you being a manager in your first answer there. Obviously, Jurgen Klopp is something similar. Do you think that needs to be looked at, the amount of pressure that managers are under, and would that put you off managing in club football again?
I absolutely love that you've given me the opportunity to open up, which I think is a really important topic. In the football world, so much has to change, whether it's off the pitch, from whatever, commercially to backroom staff to how we operate. The one thing that hasn't changed, in my opinion, over the course of times is press conference. I think this setting has to evolve so that it can be something that isn't. I get it. You're paid to gain content from this, but I'm not sure it's the best use of time between a manager and the press anymore. Like, sometimes I wish I was in the old days where maybe it was a small press pack. I actually did that earlier on, where you could sit in and you could have a little off the record conversation, but also like share good things. Now I think it's just an exercise of not tripping up. So that feels to us like, just, don't know, you say too much, you get whacked for it. You don't say enough, then it's just something dull, repetitive function that we have to serve for you guys. And I think this needs to modernise much in the way the football world does.
A long time ago, in the days at the end of the last century, when Ken Bates was chairman of Chelsea, before every season, and you were probably involved in this, I don't remember, but before every season, he would put on a lunch at the training ground, and there would be 3 tables, and there'd be 10, 11, 12 journalists on each table, and it would be a 3-course lunch, and there would be 1 empty chair at each table. And he, the chairman, the chief executive, who was then Colin Hutchinson, and probably the captain, who was Dennis Wise, would have 1 course at each table. And nothing was recorded by the club. And out of it would come 3 big stories for everyone there. 1 with the chairman, 1 with the manager, and 1 with the manager. I left out the manager, didn't I? It was probably the chairman, the manager, and the captain. Would come 3 big stories, and it would set the tone for the season, and people would get to know each other. It wouldn't be done through a communications department whose aim is to stop people getting to know each other. And in fact, having talked about the segregation in the crowd, we actually have a segregation in football between, or stopping communication between the media and the clubs in a way that there never was 30 years ago.
But there was never so much media 30 years ago. That's the problem. You have to have some sort of contact, and you can't have a phone number like when I started and you started. We had a black book with the names and numbers.
I had a blue one.
Yeah, well, that's probably because it was, if Chelsea played in black, that would have been a black book. But and you could call people up, and as a commentator, I could call. When I worked for Yorkshire Television back in the late 1970s, early 80s, every Friday I had 16 clubs, and every Friday I would ring the manager after training and get the team news. And some of it was specific that we could use, and he's not playing, and this that. And some was a little bit vague. We'll take him, but we're not sure what he's going to play. And there was always a little storyline. But they all took the calls. But there was me. That was just me. There was nobody else. Perhaps the local BBC Yorkshire area reporter was doing the same thing. And they were very. I mean, one manager said, "Phone me at the Working Man's Club. I won't be at the ground after 11:30 unless we're playing away." And it was very matey and mutual trust. But we got the information. Now, how do you get? I do these Champions League games. How do you get the information if you don't have access to Diego Simeone, who did my last Champions League game involved him, and my next one does. So if there's no press conference, how on earth am I going to get who's injured, whatever?
It's the nature of the press conference now that's become so difficult.
But that's what the questions are usually. Or, actually, Simeone's a bad example because they just had the Madrid derby, which had kicked off and ended up with the 20-minute delay and the Atletico having a player sent off right at the end. And definitely a story beyond a backstory as opposed to a forward story. And he spent the whole press conference answering questions about that, and kept saying, I want to talk about Benfica, who they were playing. And it never really happened. So somehow that's got to be covered. Otherwise, you'll have people hanging around hotels. There has to be a line of communication. And I can't see another one. I'd love to pop to the training grounds, and I live closer to the Chelsea training ground than you do. And I could pop down there, but I would not get past the security gate now, even though, people would know why I was there, and they'd say, oh, poor old soul, we want to look after the elderly and let him in. But it's not like that. It's so I have to go to the press, and I'm allowed to go to the press conference. I am allowed to go to the press conference. Sorry, that's a dig. If you don't know, Neil at the moment is taking a sabbatical from press conferences. But
I'm not taking a sabbatical. I'm not going.
We'll get that.
They have nothing of value comes out of them, and that is the problem. And most people in football don't want anything of value to come out of them, and that is a problem.
I think you're wrong, because I think some of the, like Pochettino, for example, at your club, was very engaged, very pleasant half an hour, and there was a bit of bantering, and if he said, look, I'll tell you this, but it is off the record, it would stay off the record. And it's also a way for young journalists to start realising what the business is about, and having the courage to ask questions. Where you go, any more questions?
But mostly it's for young journalists about making things up these days. So.
How do you spell cynical?
Yeah. The same way as you spell experience. It's
touche, Mr. Barnett.
Touche. I think it isn't going in the right direction, and I think it needs to be addressed.
Well, next time you come up with your solution, and we'll do a fake press conference here, Neil Barnett way, and see what we come up with.
Right. Let's move on to a segment we started last week. There used to be giants. And There Used to Be Giants this week is Sheffield Wednesday.
What a famous name. A name from way back in the dim, distant past of football history, and a great football city. We could probably not quite put Sheffield United. They've been in the Premier League last season, so it's a long time since Sheffield Wednesday been in the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only football city with two clubs who has had less time in the limelight in recent years is Bristol. Sheffield Wednesday were champions in 1903, 1904, 1929 and 1930. So they had two different teams, obviously, that did well. They were runners-up in 1961 when they had a hell of a good team, and they were unlucky.
The first team to beat Tottenham, who won the double that season.
Yeah, Tottenham were the first team to win the double that century, and Sheffield Wednesday came second.
Yeah,
they had
a really good team.
Yeah, just since then, starting then, if you like, they've been top flight from 1959 to 1970. From 1984 to 1990, and in the Premier League from 1992 to 2000. They won the FA Cup 3 times, but not since 1935. But they were runners-up 3 times. I actually went to the cup final in '66 when they were 2-up against Sheffield, against Everton, and lost 3-2. And of course, in 1993, which was their best year of, we can't even call it the modern era, it's so long ago, but the best year of their last time in the Premier League, probably, it was the one year where the FA Cup final and the League Cup final, actually no, tell a lie, there's been one since involving Chelsea. But Arsenal, Sheffield Wednesday was both the FA Cup final and the League Cup final, and Arsenal won both.
Sheffield Wednesday had won the League Cup
in 1991 as a second division team, as it was then, under Ron Atkinson, against Manchester United in the final, against his successor Alex Ferguson as manager. Yeah, so that was their best spell. In '93, their manager was Trevor Francis when they did that, and they came 7th 3 years out of 5 in that period as well. So they were a very good team, and of course, now when we talk about Sheffield Wednesday, people think Hillsborough and they think the disaster and the tragedy there. and in many ways the club hasn't recovered from something that it wasn't directly responsible for. I grew up with Hillsborough being one of the great stadia and one of the regular FA Cup semi-final
It
venues.
certainly was. And when I was working for Yorkshire Television, when it was at Hillsborough, I got to do it. So between 76 and 1981, and there were some great semi-finals there. When Coventry beat Leeds, almost a home game for Leeds, although the rivalry between Leeds and Sheffield made sure it wasn't. And that was in 87, and I covered that. There was another one where I think Spurs and Wolves was a 2-2 draw. They were really big games, and clearly the FA Cup semi-final is, I'm afraid, the ground is tainted with an FA Cup semi-final tragedy. But it hasn't seemed to have moved on. I mean, any club that's fallen down the leagues, having been in such a prominent position, is always afflicted by financial stories.
I was shocked when I looked it up that Hillsborough actually hosted a couple of semi-finals after the Liverpool Forest one. I don't remember that, but I was really shocked.
Yes, I don't remember that either. I don't recall it. It's a surprise. I'm sure anyone can look it up. But the place is. Sheffield people are really down to earth. They tell you as it is, but in a way that you can't really fall out with them over it. It was quite hard working for Yorkshire Television, where everybody in Yorkshire believes that everyone who works for Yorkshire Television is a Leeds fan because the studios are based in Leeds. And Sheffield in particular, with the two big clubs, were very critical. So you sort of came to a Saturday afternoon, they were all Saturday afternoon commentaries then, edited highlights, and you came there thinking, I know I've got to have my thing. How many times we covered Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday? We don't go to Leeds, but Leeds were in the first division. When I went to Yorkshire Television in 76, Sheffield Wednesday were in the third division, and the first game I ever did there, they lost 1-0 at home to Peterborough. It would be probably around this time of year, 1976. And then people like Jack Charlton and Howard Wilkinson came into the club in different eras and got it back up and running again. And Trevor Francis, who was very sadly missed, who was a real wonderful player, but a wonderful player with a managerial touch as well, and played for a long time. He did have some golden moments. Of course, they beat Sheffield United in the semi-final, the Sheffield Derby semi-final, which was played at Wembley. And
was that the Chris Waddle goal?
Yeah. And they just had the edge, and it was very emotional. Trevor had all his family there, and it was a really great football occasion involving a parochial rivalry, really. So I hope their time comes again. You know,
But Sheffield need a Premier League club.
Well, they had one last season, and then Sheffield United have been up and down. They need two Premier League clubs. Yeah. I mean, it is. You mentioned Bristol. Well, Bristol doesn't quite have it's got a rugby feel to it, hasn't it? Bristol. Yeah. Although great credit to the two clubs for battling on, and Bristol City have come close. And of course, did get in the old first division.
Yeah, they did.
I think their first game, it was away to Arsenal, and they won at Highbury. I think that was maybe my first game for Yorkshire Television. That must have been 1976 as well. Paul Cheesley scored the goal and got injured the following Wednesday, and I don't think ever played again, or certainly tried to come back, but never really played again. That's the ups and downs of football. But they had some good players, Jerry Gow and people like that. Alan Dix, I think, was the manager. So, Bristol's. We could talk about Bristol another time, but they're not perhaps under the category of they used to be giants. They're trying to be giants. Certainly,
no. I think if you try to describe Sheffield Wednesday's state of being now, the word that would come into my mind would be rust. It's a bit like tinny, rusty. This once great striding giant of football has just disappeared and got rusty.
I think it's a sign of the economic times generally. It's not. It's a city that's had to work hard for everything that it's got, and to get back to the top level, Sheffield Wednesday as a football club will have to work very, very hard. But it's not impossible. Who'd have thought when Luton were in the National League, the Conference, that they'd be in the Premier League so quickly? That's what we have to protect, I think. Our joy of football, I know we share this, although we're at completely opposite ends of the pyramid in our favourite teams. But the pyramid is the special thing about this country, and it's under threat all sorts of ways. But we must protect it.
I'd love Sheffield Wednesday to get back. I think
I love the shirts. So we're talking about shirts today.
Yeah.
They have blue and white stripes. We at Sky, you can find it somewhere online. We were given the first Premier League, 1992. We went and played a game for the promotion of Sky's coverage of it, and a set of 22 shirts were there. So we had 2 lots of 11, but they were all different. And mine was the Sheffield Wednesday shirt.
Brilliant. Okay, that's that. We're now coming on to this new segment. This is the last segment today. And it's one game. And we're using our young age to go back to the 1950s and come up to date with one game,
one every year. So
one game every
to
decade, and it's just something so we can visit a memory, visit an idea, visit a development, just have joy in what we've lived through. So you kick us off, 1950s.
Yeah, well, we've talked about it a bit on this podcast, and there's still more to come, I promise you. Charlton 7, Huddersfield 6, which is, I believe, the greatest game never seen. And I'm doing a lot of personal research to try and come up with something that we can bring people closer to it, because it's a story that needs telling today for this generation. I mean, literally today, but for the people need to be aware of it, and they're not. So that's my game. 4 months later, I was at Wembley for the first time in my life. Woking won the Amateur Cup, which is now like the FA Trophy, where they won 3-0 just 4 months later. So that 57-58 season holds great personal memories. For me, it wasn't the happiest in other ways. People look at it from other clubs' point of view. But so that's my game, and I don't want to labour on about it because I'm going to tell you more about it in future shows.
Right,
so you've got over to Chelsea versus
Everton. My first game.
Surprise.
And it was just so different, obviously, in the 1950s. So you didn't have television. You didn't have any experience of it.
You did have television, but there was no football on it, really. Yeah.
I was taken to a stand that was on stilts, which you'll remember, that was behind the corner flag, so it was diagonally looking out onto the pitch. And the stilts weren't very strong, and it shook. And so my greatest memory is of Jimmy Greaves, aged about 20, coming to take a corner below us, and everyone going, Chelsea, bang, 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 with their feet on the ground, and the stand going like that. And it was just the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me. And you fall in love. The actual on-pitch thing, I remember 2 things. One was that when Jimmy Greaves hit that football, that old leather type football, it curled into the penalty area. It just seemed impossible that somebody could do that. And the other thing I remember was 2 offside goals, and not understanding what was going on, because nobody had ever told me about offside before I got into the game. It hadn't been a subject matter, and I was sort of having it explained to me.
Turn to whoever you went with and said,
my dad.
Oh yeah, well, he said that in a few years they'll call it VAR.
Yeah. And the other thing, of course, the other 2 big differences. The teams didn't warm up beforehand. They just came out 5 minutes before kick-off and did a little trot around and nothing else. Mostly just chatted, kicked the ball to each other. And, of course, the teams came out separately, not together in a theatrical preparation for the game. My dad wanted me to support Everton. That's why he took me. He knew the Everton chairman and fancied swanning around the boardrooms of London. And me, being a contrary little git, said no. Chelsea were the first.
You
team
haven't
that came
changed.
out. No. So that's my. Everyone remembers their first game. 1960s.
Well, I'm a child of the World Cup of '66. I was so thrilled. It was at the time my impressionable time of my life. So, and I was lucky enough in later years to write a book with all the players and get to know them all. Sadly, very few of them now with us anymore. But it's still unique for English football. I've been moved to the FA to try and find another route to just go for this, not to work on the development of English football, but to basically try and find a marksman really to target the next World Cup in Thomas Tuchel. So, but it was great. You were alive and you saw the reaction. Mm-hmm. The football was only 3 weeks later. The final was July the 31st, I think, or the 30th. So the season started very quickly after, and the grounds were packed. Mm. And I've said to quite a few people, wait to see when we do win something, you won't believe what it's going to be like. Mm. And I think even more so now with all the connections that people have and the way they can spread their joy instead of just like dancing around front room is what I was doing.
Well, there was a lot of national dissatisfaction that the players weren't honoured in the annual honours list or the twice annual honours list, and yet there was a lot of snobbery that you don't give it to footballers just for winning a trophy.
What about FIFA? They only gave medals to the winner, the 11 players who played. It was 2008 or something like that when the other members of the squad, like Jimmy Greaves, got their medals. So it wasn't just that kind of snub, but
good game as well.
It was a smashing game, and it wasn't if you were desperately wanting your team to win, as I was, and the goal to make it 2-2 and send it to extra time. But Jeff wouldn't have got his hat-trick if that had been the case, and his life would have been very different. Well, and he still owns that one record. You mentioned Kylian Mbappé, hat-trick in the final, but he lost. Yeah. So Jeff Hurst is still the only person to get a hat-trick in a World Cup final and win.
My game is the 1963 FA Cup final, Manchester United-Leicester. My dad had access to cup final tickets, and that was the first one I went to. And it was just such a big occasion. And Leicester actually got to a couple of cup finals in the 1960s. They've kind of often been the club that's climbed higher than you'd expect them to.
They lost them all, and then they finally won a cup final in 2021. 2021.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know who they beat. Anybody remember?
But Manchester United. It was a young Dennis Law. It was Bobby Charlton as a left winger, not as a midfielder. It was a centre forward that I'm sure loved, called David Hurd, a big barnstorming centre forward, a Scottish centre forward.
Played for Arsenal as well.
Yeah, and had a brother who played in the top flight, George Hurd. In those days, everyone when they got old went to Stoke. And he was one of the ones I remember who went to Stoke. And the goalkeeper, Harry Gregg, from the Munich disaster, the hero, one of the heroes of that, Bill Falk. It was, I can remember it all, and it was Gordon Banks, of course, in goal for Leicester. It was an excellent. Frank McClintock, who led Arsenal to the double in 1971 as a central defender, was a savage central midfielder, Roy Keane style, in that team for Leicester.
Would you mind if I just cut across you, because you mentioned Manchester United's legends? In April 1969, we've moved on a little bit, I made my debut in non-league football in the Isthmian League, and I came on for a player called Alan Pinckney, who there was only one sub, so I was going to get on somehow. But Alan Pinckney, in the January of 1969, had played against Manchester United, against Breslau and Charlton for Exeter City. He was a student at one of the colleges down at Exeter, and he was able to register and still come back and play for my club, Corinthian Casuals. And I remember thinking, bloody hell, he's played against the really great player. I'm coming on for him. He went on to play for Crystal Palace and Fulham, and I think emigrated to South Africa in the end. I went into television.
1970s.
Well, this is my first television game. Southampton v Sheffield Wednesday, December the 28th, 1974. At the old ground, the Dell, very intimate surroundings, a real shot in the dark for me because I had no previous experience. I didn't do any radio like most commentators. In fact, pretty much all the commentators you could name have all come through the radio route. And I got this chance to have a go at something that I possibly thought deep down I might just be able to do. Because of my football background, not because I had any experience in journalism or a little bit in journalism, but certainly not in broadcasting. And it wasn't a great game, but Sheffield Wednesday scored after 2 minutes, 1-1-0, and never won another league game all season. It's just that I've said that a couple of times recently on other programs, but it's unbelievable that December the 28th they didn't win. So no wonder that they went. That's the second division, the championship game. So they were relegated at the end of that season. But it was a big day, and it's a very personal memory. So I can't think of the 70s without thinking that's when it all began.
My 1970s. I'm going to Craven Cottage. 1977, Fulham versus Chelsea. Chelsea got promoted that season, but on Easter Saturday got whipped 3-1 at Fulham. And Fulham had in their team a player who was overweight, couldn't run, had slow feet, and probably had just come from the pub because it was George Best. He never left the centre circle. He was beyond his physical best by a long way. He never left the centre circle, and he ran the game. And you were talking earlier about personality and character and how important is it that is part of great players. This guy had an understanding of football and a personality that couldn't be matched. And it was an extraordinary performance from someone so far past his best. Second division, but it was, honestly, it stands out as one of the great opposition performances by an individual to me against my club.
He was such a bright person, and obviously with a weakness that in the end cost him a longer life.
In his DNA, because his mum went the same way. Yeah.
But he was. I remember doing a shoot with him at Health Farm around this time where he was trying to get back into shape, and he did everything that we wanted. But he after the sauna, he had to jump in the cold pool, and he said, "I'm only going to do this once. You better get it right."
Yeah.
But he was lovely, and and of course he did work in the media. He had a good time at Sky towards the end of his life.
1980s.
Yeah, I'm back to a World Cup final again because it's the only World Cup final I've ever commentated on for British television, which was Italy against West Germany in 1982 in Spain. And I'd have been a commentator for less than 8 years, and it was really, what was going to happen was that Brian Moore, who was the main presenter and main commentator for ITV all through the non-World Cup final stages, all through the seasons and all the qualifying games, but he presented the World Cup, so he was in London. And England got knocked out on the Monday before the final. And this was the tournament where they didn't lose a game. They got knocked out because of goal difference, or on the system they had two groups, and England drew 0-0 with Germany and Spain, West Germany and Spain, and then there was semi-finals after that. But we were told that Brian wasn't coming out, and so there were four of us left for 4 games, 2 semi-finals, third and fourth place playoff, and the final. So we were all going to get a game. And as still pretty junior in the ranks, I thought I'd probably, if I was lucky, I'd get a semi-final. The third and fourth place game is not one that you'd be happy to do it. It's like someone's going to finish third in the World Cup, so doing it. But I didn't know. And then I was told by the man who had 105 caps for England, Billy Wright, who was our chef de mission because of his outstanding image in the game. He could open most doors because of who he was. And he was faffing about because we were moving. England were leaving the Madrid area and going home. So we had to sort of get some cameras, see them off. And he said to me, you go and do that. And when you come back, I'll tell you where you're going next. So I went and did my bit and thanked everybody for all the help, which was very considerable help that England gave us in those days. And then, so I walked back to this. It was out of Madrid. It was up in the mountains. So it was a bit of a sort of chalet hotel. And I walked in and Billy was going, oh, got to get packed and get out of here and everything. And I just sort of waited and he went, oh yeah, you've got to go to Madrid. You're doing the final. And so I'll be honest with you. I went to my room and blubbed a bit because it was a bit of a shock, really. But it was a wonderful game, and there was one moment in it where I suppose I got lucky, or maybe it was a little bit of ability. I don't know. But Paolo Rossi was the hero of Italy. He scored 3 in the win that knocked out Brazil.
In the last group game of the second group,
yeah, and 2 in the semi-final against Poland, and so he was on a roll. And the first goal is it's a scramble, a real scramble, but we'd seen Rossi 5 times wheel away in the celebration, but knowing as I did that footballers could claim goals, because I was trying to do that as a non-league player. I wasn't sure, but I went with it, and that was the first goal of what turned out to be a 3-1 win. And I'm backing him in my mind, really, but I'm not sure. And I got a message in my ear about 30, 40 seconds later saying, from London, just to tell you, and I'm waiting to hear, oh, yeah, somebody else got a touch. And they went, we've looked at it very closely and you were right. I still didn't get another World Cup final for a British television because I left ITV, So.
My 1980s game is the 1988 FA Cup final, the first one I worked, Wimbledon beating Liverpool, the Crazy Gang beating the Culture Club, as John Motson so famously said.
Wonderful words.
I'd been working with Wimbledon for the years, but I'd started working with Club Call and was doing them and QPR and Chelsea. And it was, what a great occasion that was. What a great occasion. I mean, they went out drinking the night before Wimbledon. They turned up in minibuses to Wembley. They were just in your face the whole time. I mean, Vinnie Jones we talked about Roy Keane earlier. Vinnie Jones almost killed Steve McMahon, who was a Roy Keane himself, in the first 20 minutes of the game with the most savage tackle that would now be red carded immediately. And it was just a great occasion. Liverpool obviously come from the Hillsborough disaster, but they had won the Hillsborough disaster was the following year. The following year. I'll take that back. They had come from winning the league with what was called the Dream Team. When Peter Beardsley was brought in by Kenny Dalglish to succeed himself, and John Barnes was the best player in the country.
Correct.
And Don Howe was the coach of Wimbledon. Bobby Gore was the manager, but Don Howe did all the football coaching. Bobby Gore did all the getting them wound up. But Don Howe swapped the wingers for that game. And so Alan Cork, who was an old centre forward and had been playing on the right wing, was moved to the left wing. And Dennis Wise, who was a young, in-your-face snapper of ankles, was moved to the right wing where he could double up with the right back and take out John Barnes, who had a very quiet game as a result of the two of them doubling up on him. And internally, Don Howe was thought to be a genius for sorting John Barnes out in this way. It was just you said we both love the pyramid. Wimbledon, topping the pyramid, was just one of the great occasions of
the
football.
second game I ever saw as a young boy at 8 was Woking v Wimbledon
In non-league.
And they'd gone all the way up, and it was an extraordinary experience, having followed that sort of tangentially, really, because they weren't my team, but they were always getting in the way. They were always beating Woking through the 60s. So it was, and stealing some of our players as well. But it did show that you could get there, and
Wimbledon were never too concerned with the rules of the game.
Well, I've got a job coming up where they want me to do some commentary on a Vinnie Jones documentary, so I'm not quite sure what's going to be required of me, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of tackles in there.
I asked Vinnie Jones on TV, Chelsea TV, if he saw any of the old gang, and this is when he was already a guaranteed film star, and he said, I often see him. He said, I pull back the curtain of my bedroom and I look out and I see those tourist coaches coming round looking at the houses of the famous, and I see lots of my old mates on those buses
on the Beverly Hills tour. Yeah.
Right, let's go on to the 1990s.
Yeah, we should rattle through these. I mean, everybody knows about my love for Liverpool against Newcastle, the 4-3 in 1996, two teams, great teams, going hell for leather at each other, great goal scorers, Fowler and Collymore and Ginola and Ferdinand and Asprilla, and they were head-to-head for the title. Neither of them won it, but it was an extraordinary, it was a midweek game, standalone game for television.
And would you say that Newcastle were the best team not to win the Premier League?
Yeah, in that period, that first period under Kevin Keegan, probably. There might be others to be challenged, but they certainly, they were the entertainers, weren't they? Which Sky christened them, and we were always in Newcastle. We were always.
I mean,
there,
the teams that come second regular, like Liverpool to Manchester City, but Liverpool won it in 2020, but Newcastle never did. And
well, it's never in Newcastle, isn't it? And we'll wait to see.
I mean, if this Arsenal doesn't, they might be considered in the same breath.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is hard to make comparisons. But they, of the time, new Premier League, they didn't play in the first season. They got promoted, so that they played in the second season, took it by storm. And another great game for them in that period was beating Manchester United 5-0. And then one of the teams won the league, but it wasn't Newcastle. Yeah. So,
well, my game in the 1990s is Chelsea winning the European Cup Winners' Cup in Stockholm against Stuttgart.
That's the third out of
but
5.
The reason I've chosen this one is it was my first European
there
final.
Are more to come.
It was my first European final. And they're fantastic European finals. They are unbelievable events. I think UEFA runs them brilliantly, but I do think the choice
Apart
of
from
venue,
the press conferences.
After the press conferences, yeah. Actually, I got thrown out of the dressing room after the game. I was in the Chelsea dressing room taking photographs after the game, which and the UEFA officer found me and threatened to ban me forevermore for being in the dressing room. But
they got there in the end.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the thing is, the players wanted all my photographs, but they were so enthusiastic about me being thrown out. It was unbelievable. But the one thing that I do feel is they choose the venue at the beginning of the season for these European finals, and I think they often get it wrong. And I understand that you need a big build-up to it, but I still don't understand why you can't, at the quarter-final stage, choose the venue. And certainly in Stockholm, the Stockholm ground wasn't big enough for an English club and a German club who aren't used to winning European titles.
It could go the other way. I did Carl Zeiss Jena against Dinamo Tbilisi. That's East Germany against Georgia, or the Soviet Union, Georgia as it was then, in Dusseldorf, I think. And obviously it wasn't possible for the fans to get there. So,
well, if they thought about it, again, I know quarter-final, even that might be too early, but I didn't go to Baku for Chelsea Arsenal in the Europa League because I find it hard going to North London to watch Arsenal.
It's amazing that Chelsea managed to win 4-1 without you.
Going to Anyway, right. 2000 noughties.
Well, the Champions League, Milan, Liverpool. Obviously, everyone knows the storyline: 3 down at half time, and in the end going to penalty shootout, clawing it back. I love comebacks, and it happened to be the comeback for the English club, so obviously felt more about that. Milan had some wonderful players, but couldn't nail it down. I mean, sometimes you say, well, once you get a third goal, that's enough. But
And the 3 goals came so quickly for Liverpool.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all sorts of stories about what actually happened in the dressing room at half-time, who did what and who said what, and was there a positional change and everything, but it all seemed to be forgotten after the game. They've won it, and it was against Carlo Ancelotti, wasn't it? That's the strangest thing.
Didn't Liverpool go into the game without Dietmar Hamann and brought him on at half-time to shore it up? They did the Pep thing of Man City against Chelsea. They didn't have a defensive midfielder.
Well, the fact that they got an early goal in the second half and then it just kicked on. And I did tell this in a podcast the other week, but I'd been at a game where Milan had won 4-1 at home, I think, and then lost 4-0 away to Deportivo La Coruña, something like that, the year before.
Yeah, in the semi-finals, I think. Quarterfinals.
Yeah. And I did say, and I didn't do the commentary for Sky, I did it for an Australian channel. I did say at halftime, I said they have shown that they can be vulnerable. It sounds a smart-ass comment now, but I'm just trying to find something to give a bit of optimism so people didn't just switch off and go to bed, which with the time difference they probably would have done. So amazing and great for English football. Liverpool's contribution to the Champions League, European Cup in particular, has been a thread.
Well, I'm going for a Champions League final, my first one, Manchester United, Chelsea. I was very sceptical, cynical about all the build-up. Oh, God, all this rubbish, all this trying to be the Super Bowl. I can't stand it. It was fantastic. Everything about a Champions League final, you just feel it's the biggest occasion in football. I thought it was phenomenal. And I remember sitting there looking around and thinking, I've been coming to football all my life. I cannot believe that I've come to watch my club in a Champions League final.
Spread over 2 days, because we went past midnight in Moscow.
Yeah,
there was a famous, it was an instrumental in the 60s called Midnight in Moscow. And so we were all waiting to deliver this line. Is it midnight? I'm not lazy. Is it midnight yet? Can I say it? So,
but it was UEFA do put on a good show for the Champions League final, and it's an occasion like no other. I've never been to a World Cup final, but the Champions League finals I've been to have felt like affairs, not more solemn but more intense, more passionate, more not tribal, because but just they glow with the importance of the occasion.
Yeah, that was it was very special. But you talk about why have it in Moscow when there are two English clubs. Yeah. But I think what you've just explained is why they do it. I think we all were mystified by going to Moscow, particularly for a game that kicked off so late, and it was a unique experience. And so
in the same year, Zenit St. Petersburg were in the Europa. Well, it was the UEFA Cup still final at Old Trafford against Rangers, against Glasgow. Not Glasgow Rangers, against Rangers of Glasgow, and
like Lisbon of Sporting.
Yeah, and the Russian government said that having a ticket to the game would act as a visa, so you didn't all have to go through the process of getting a visa. The supporters to go to Moscow. I was working, so my visa was organised for me. But the British government didn't do the same thing for St. Petersburg fans coming to Manchester. And when the bid for the 2018 World Cup, which was England versus Russia in many ways, came to a climax, I know that counted against England. And it's just the flipping politics of this country which the sort of superiority complex of it, if you like. Russia played a sensible game and got it, and that was 1-0 to Russia on that occasion.
I will drop a name here. I was in South Africa covering the 2010 World Cup, and I was sitting at the back of a plane across the aisle from Boris Johnson, who was now deployed at that time to try and help the English bid for staying in the World Cup. And so this is 2010, and I said, good luck, I hope it goes well. He said, it's going to Russia. So I said, oh, right.
That's the only thing he ever got right. On to the 2010s.
Well, listen, we've got his shirt, a replica shirt here, Aguero. Of course, that game is an astonishing match of memory. Not so much the match, but I suppose, not just the last goal, but the way the pendulum swung in the second half. The first half, there wasn't too much in the first half, really. So I'm going to say that, but I've got one or two just to throw in as well. I was lucky enough to be at Brazil 1, Germany 7, the 2014 in Belo Horizonte, the semi-final, which shocked a nation and heartbroke a nation, and completely confounded the German players. I'll never forget seeing Toni Kroos, who scored 2 goals, and goal scoring, if you look at his record, is not his biggest strength. He scored 2 goals and this avalanche of goals in the first half, and looking around going, the look said, is this really happening? So even those that were affecting the demolition didn't really believe that it was happening. So that was an extraordinary game. In 2016, the Battle of the Bridge, which got Leicester the title, and it deserves a mention, I think, as well. When Chelsea stopped Spurs, that 2-goal lead that they ate back, and Eden Hazard got the equaliser that gave Leicester the title, which is an amazing thing. And it will forgive me, then my 2 worlds collided, and I was in the dugout for Woking v Watford of the Premier League in the 3rd round of the FA Cup in 2019, and Watford went all the way to the final, and we only lost 2-0, and they had to bring Troy Deeney on to get the 2nd goal when we were nibbling at a comeback, shall I say. It wasn't piling on the pressure, to use a commentary cliche. So those as well, it was obviously a fascinating decade. Well, all the decades are fascinating if you're involved in football, but if you forgive me just going outside the box with those.
Well, I'm obviously going for Chelsea winning the Champions League, but again, not because it's my club, just
not because I was sitting behind you in the ground.
Yeah. Martin came on American Radio and said that was the worst commentary he ever did because I was up and down for the whole game.
I couldn't see the game.
but it was just what it meant, how much it meant to a club winning it for the first time. Just
First London club.
Yep, yeah, still the only London club. The celebrations, I didn't go to bed that night. The party afterwards where all the players kept jumping
Surely that's not unique, is it?
No, but the players kept jumping in the swimming pool at this party, and they wrecked all their phones. I've never seen so many footballers who couldn't call home afterwards because they kept jumping in the pool with their phones. It was unbelievable. And afterwards, I just went and got my stuff from my hotel, got out and got to the plane, the club plane coming back. And there was going to be the parade, the bus parade, and I was on the top of the bus with a microphone. And I was thinking, God, my voice is going to give out. I'm not going to cope with this. I need some sleep. I'll get some sleep on the plane. And I got on the plane, and I don't know what he was doing on the club plane, but he obviously pulled a good one. But Steve Redgrave, the Olympic legend, came and sat next to me, who I'd never met, and who had had a good night's sleep despite us winning the Champions League, and talked to me non-stop about the game all the way home. So I never got a minute's sleep.
He told me he listened to you all the way home.
But again,
it was an away win. I think that's the great thing about it, isn't it? I mean, to beat Bayern in their own backyard, and it was 6 days after Aguero.
Yeah,
so it's an amazing week. Amazing week for us and for football.
Yeah, wonderful. 2020s.
Well, how many of mine have been World Cup finals? It's only the 3rd one, I think. Argentina, France. it's like a dream thinking about it, because it was late at night and it went later and later, and I went straight to the airport. And to be honest, the flight was, I think, about 10 to 4 or something a.m. And I'm thinking, I'm going to miss this. Not because that wouldn't have been the end of the world, but the game went on so long. And then, of course, after the shootout, then it went on forever with the players on the field, and the sort of lengthy, proper presentation, and then a bit of perhaps slightly unwelcome banter from between the two sides. And you couldn't take your eye. And we kept broadcasting until eventually they all disappeared. The players all disappeared. So it was amazing. I mean, Messi and Mbappé obviously bestrode it, but everybody played a part. There's some young French players who are still in the squad now, who sort of earned their stripes even though they lost the final, you know. So
they drew the final. They lost the penalty shootout.
No, I'm not having. And my OPTA thing, I should have put that in, because I'm not having that either. If you've ever been involved with a team that's lost the penalty shootout, you've drawn nothing. Maybe the curtains on the cup that you were in.
Great goalkeeping as well. Great goalkeeping.
Yeah, great. Yes. Yeah, we both love Emmy in our ways, don't we? I mean, I think he probably did slightly across the line then, but he is a fantastic goalkeeper. Yeah. And part of the thrill of, I think it's to see Aston Villa with him at one end and John Duran at the other end. It's one of the great sights at the moment, even if you have to wait 70 minutes for the two of them, both for John Duran to be on the pitch. So, no, it was amazing. And somebody rang me up before the game and said, "How do you feel going into your last World Cup final?" I said, "Well, do you know something?" So I'm available for the next one.
My final game is a surprise one in a way. West Ham Arsenal from last season. I was just working the game, and it was West Ham 0, Arsenal 6. And there have been a number of scores like that recently. And I would contend that from the 1970s on to this decade, we haven't had scores like that. We haven't had big away wins. Something's happened in the Premier League that the top...
Nottingham Forest 1, Manchester United 8.
Well, that's a rare...
Well, probably the West Ham 0, Arsenal 6 is quite rare.
Yeah,
as well.
but
it's your memory.
But Manchester City have been doling them out week in, week out, and Newcastle have had a few as well, and I think it's become more frequent, and I think the reason it's become more frequent is that the rich clubs can call on rich substitutes, and they can have 16 players bombing your goal all game with fresh legs, and it sometimes the overpowering of it is extraordinary. It is fantastic football at one end. It's not maybe such good football at the other end, but it's. I don't think the Premier League is as competitive as it used to be. I think that the struggling clubs down the bottom have fallen a lot further behind. And I think one of the reasons is a lot of them are trying to play too much football. They're not cynical as they used to be. And I mean, West Ham just got torn apart on the day. Absolutely torn apart.
Yeah, they fell apart just before half-time, didn't they? Where the goals came, suddenly it went
from 1-0 to 4-0 very quickly.
Like I don't know that I agree with you. I think that playing the football is... you're probably not going to... Even Arsenal probably this year have admitted they're not going to beat Manchester City playing at City's own game. So they've tightened the belt, so to speak. They've been more pragmatic, and they've been very successful doing it. So I just think that it clearly, unless your club virtually orders you to play like that playing a nice season in the Premier League and getting relegated is not something that I can't see the fans appreciating. I mean, you go to football to see your team win, don't you? I mean, try to win. And if you know that the methodology is very, very different to what you're going to come up against and not as good, it's a tough one to take. I mean, Southampton are the case at the moment, and Russell Martin will be challenged on his philosophy. I think he's got it in him to actually do what he probably hasn't said publicly, but to tweak it enough to give them a competitive edge. I hope so, because we don't want that. We don't want 3 up, 3 down, 3 up, 3 down with the same clubs involved. So, but I still stand by the thing that I say to as every opportunity, that this is the best, most watchable football in my 70 years of watching the game at different age groups, different levels and different circumstances. It's the best to keep your attention. You don't know, teams attack. Nobody manages matches anymore. Nobody goes to the corner flag anymore. It's almost as if they've taken that out as a law in the game. You can't do that because one of the reasons is you've got 5 players on, probably, all of whom want to show the manager they're not players who take the ball into the corner flag. They want to score the goals, and I don't blame them. It's extraordinary. Even the recent England game in Finland, when Finland scored to make it 3-1, very near the end, the England subs were on, and instead of going, well, let's just keep the ball at the back, that'll do for the Finns as well, and they're going hell for leather to try and get other goals, and I think it's great entertainment to do that, and it's it's a consequence of making the game fresher when you can bring that many substitutes. So you can manage a game and say, well, look, we'll stick at it. You're my lot for the first 60 minutes, and then we'll bring on a different team. And like in American sports, actually then they take them off again and put them back on again. But I do think that sort of second phase, we're having to get used to as commentators, because it completely throws you in terms of that's the shape, and you've been working on the detail of the tactics, and then, oh goodness me, now he's brought on 3 forwards. What are we going to do now? And how are they going to? Where's he going to go? And it's a great watch. It's a wonderful watch. It's a wonderful game. It's the joy of football.
A podcast promise: we will revisit this one day in 10 years' time and add the 2030s on. From Martin and me.
You're speaking for yourself there. Please God.
Ta-ra.
See ya.
Thanks for listening, watching. If you can't see, I'm holding a piece of paper. These are my notes to just help me through everything that we've been talking about. And I've got a note here. Don't forget to mention Thomas Tuchel. But quite frankly, it was decided that Miranda Lambert was more important. Thank you again.